Welcome everyone to New South Wales DPI Dairy webinar number 7, Disruptive Digital Technologies with the Power to Transform Agriculture. My name is Nicholas Lyons and I am the Development Officer for Robotic Milking Systems within the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. This is a national role supporting technology adoption on Australian dairy farms with a particular focus, but not limited to robotic milking systems. Today we have the great privilege of having an international guest speaker with us. Mr. Aidan Connolly is the Chief Innovation Officer at Alltech. Alltech defines itself as a leading global biotechnology company whose mission is to improve the health and performance of people, animals, and plants through natural nutrition and scientific innovation. As a bit of a background, Aidan graduated with a bachelor's degree in commerce and a master's degree in international marketing from the University College Dublin in Ireland. His expertise is in branding, agriculture, and international marketing. He has been with Alltech for over 25 years in various roles throughout Europe, South America, and North America. Currently, Aidan is the Chief Innovation Officer in Alltech and therefore responsible for pulling together a team within the company's research department that will primarily focus on developing innovative nutrition-based technologies. Aidan is also responsible for implementing the Piercelands Accelerator, a late-stage agri-tech accelerator run by Alltech and Dogpatch Labs, which received 184 applications from more than 30 countries, including Australia. There is a series of agtech businesses that are being accelerated as part of that program. The one in Australia is AgriWeb, that is a mobile herd and farm management application developed for cattle, sheep, and wool producers with an online trading platform. But there's also one called MooCall from Ireland that is particularly relevant to the dairy industry. In this occasion, Aidan has kindly volunteered his time to share with us his insight into disruptive digital technologies with the power to transform agriculture. This presentation, as you might have seen in the invitation, will be mostly focused on a bit of blue sky thinking towards which digital technology innovations have the ability to transform every link in the food chain from seed to fork. So, Aidan, it is a privilege for us to have you share some of your knowledge and inspiring insight into this very exciting topic about the future with us here today. So the stage is yours. I will share presentation rights with you now. So you should be able to share your screen with everyone online.
Okay. Show my screen. Hopefully that works.
Coming up. Yep.
Super. Well, firstly, Nico, I just want to say equally, it's really an honor for me to be on this call. And obviously, to be able to do so from so far away is quite extraordinary. I think that's the power of new technology that we're going to be speaking about today. Apart from my position with Alltech, I'm also a professor in China at the Agricultural University in Beijing and at the Michael Smurfit Graduate School of Business at University College Dublin. So they've asked me to think about the future and to maybe write on some of these areas. And the ones I've written, quite a few that have appeared on my LinkedIn page, others in journals, but I'm particularly interested in the whole area of digital technologies and how I think they're going to disrupt agriculture. I'd want to preface it by saying I don't feel I'm an expert in digital technologies, but I'm certainly very focused on how agriculture needs to change, will change, and I think from that perspective, these are the technologies and the perspectives I have on how this is going to affect dairying and agriculture in general. I should, in starting, point out that the idea of forming this 8 from the digital technologies came from a recent game where the All Blacks were doing their haka, and the Irish, not knowing what to do, decided, in tribute to a rugby player called Axel Foley, who had passed away, to form the shape of an 8, which was a number that he had wore on his back. And fortunately for us, this was a game that Ireland managed to win. So Hopefully you don't have too many Kiwis on your call, but it was certainly a proud day, the first time ever in the history of Irish rugby that they had beaten the All Blacks. We understand more concretely in terms of agriculture that we are facing big numbers from the perspective of where global population might go. We do have an agricultural system which appears to be quite inefficient. It takes a lot of feed to produce meat, it takes a lot of water to produce milk and meat. So therefore, as we move forward, those are inefficiencies we're going to have to drive to really become not just efficient from a cost perspective, but also from an environmental footprint perspective. Climate change is playing in as well. We see this specifically in terms of land, sunshine and water, and it appears as though the only people with those in abundance, apart from Australia, when you're not having a drought, is of course Brazil and Africa. So that's going to be a serious limitation for agriculture as we move forward. We do have this strange dichotomy that now, for the first time in the history of the world, 1 billion people, maybe 1.1 billion people who are obese, who've got too much food, and 1 billion people who don't have enough. So I think we're moving towards, and I've written on this as well, the prosumer movement, which is going to be quite influential as we move forward as well. I think world population milestones will be quite critical, but from my perspective, I think that we're going to see very big changes in terms of agriculture as we move forward. Specifically, I think that we are looking obviously at, if you think of the agricultural development from the perspective of the 5 stages we've seen, early domestication of animals and of course of crops, moving towards efficient farming systems with irrigation, the plough, etc. Then the move in the last 150 years towards mechanization and the use of fertilizers, the Green Revolution, which allowed the development of crop genetics, and then more recently the technological revolution, which is where we can address many of the issues of digital agriculture and what can happen from that perspective. So as you can see here, really I feel that this 5th stage of agriculture, the digital revolution, is where we're going to be able to collect information, data, digitizing farming and the different ways in which farming measurements occur, and then leading towards precision agriculture, precision planting, precision animal nutrition, all forms of agriculture being much more precise. As you saw in the first slide, here I've listed the 8 technologies that I think, 8 categories of technology that I think are transformative. In fact, for those of you with keen eyes, you'll notice that maybe 4 of those could be separated into hardware, the top 4, the bottom 4 into software, and I've actually put a 9th factor in, which is the Internet of Things, as the joining point between all 8. If we move to 3D printing, this is, from my perspective, very, very exciting and still relatively untapped. It will allow farmers and producers to think of things, maybe ways in repairing animals. You could imagine cows where we can produce limbs for them, so that instead of having to put down an animal, particularly cattle and horses, we'd be able to replace that with some sort of artificially created limb that would be perfectly formed, the right size for that animal. We could look at printing food. We could look at ways of avoiding production losses and, of course, eventually lowering costs. Examples of this, there's a company called Food Inc. It's a pop-up dining experience where they promise to be able to print the food, the furniture and utensils. We also have Foodini, which for a mere snip at $2,000 can produce your food at home. Obviously, from some perspective, that particularly focuses on things like cakes and creations of different food produced by flour and by sugar. But perhaps in the future, and maybe this is a little far-fetched, but nonetheless to give you the idea, maybe you could imagine your printer printing out your burgers, printing out your fries. Certainly as we've moved more and more towards food products, it really will increase the flexibility of being able to create those types of experiences. Robots are, within the 8, a type of technology which has already been widely used. Robots obviously allow us to reduce labor costs. That's not just an issue in Australia or Europe or the United States, but that's increasingly an issue in places like Brazil and China. So the reduction of labor costs, the elimination of repetitive tasks which can be accomplished more efficiently by robot is obviously very important. And we have seen the market grow to $1 billion and expected to grow to $16 billion a year by 2020. Some of the robots that you can imagine are obviously those involved in planting, weeding, and out in the fields, moving around. However, I think the really interesting parts are where those robots start to work autonomously. You have the ability for them to use, obviously linked to artificial intelligence, or work through preset instructions as to what they do in different situations. It is clear that we need also to be thinking about soft robots. Not sure if you're familiar with soft robots, but these, for example, are robots created using compressed air, so not metal. And you could imagine moving cows through a chute into the area for milking or herding. This is where the ability for a robot to be very strong and very soft at the same time, moving from one to the other for delicate tasks, could be quite interesting. I had the opportunity to wear one of these. This is me in California at other labs in San Francisco. Effectively, by putting compressed air into my arm, this allowed me to triple my strength. You could imagine tasks on farm involving lifting extreme weights or wearing a suit built with this. Clearly, you could imagine the military is very interested in this idea, but on farms there are tremendous opportunities to use compressed air to increase the strength of people for jobs, so menial jobs, jobs involving a lot of heavy lifting, can suddenly be accomplished by somebody with no strength at all. I do want to refer, of course, to the robotic milkers. I'm not taking a position on these at the moment, but clearly these are increasingly being used. This is the example of De Laval. Of course, Lely is also a leader in that field. We have, as part of our accelerator, received a proposal from an Israeli company that can produce robots at a fraction of the cost. They were not one of our 10 finalists, but I believe that the cost of these machines will come down as people look at other ways to produce these systems. Again, you could imagine the compressed air as being part of that as we move forward. If we look at things that can be very more easily accomplished, certainly crops such as wine really facilitate the use of robots, relocating potted plants in a nursery, herding to move cattle or mixing feed, milking machines, and eventually, of course, in the case of milk, allowing the cows to decide when they want to be milked rather than us making that decision for them. So I really feel these are all part of the future of what we could imagine from a robotic perspective. The future is here already. I don't know how Somali pirates, should I say, feel about hijacking boats where there's nobody on board, but certainly makes their job a lot harder. These boats are already ready to sail the waters and can move cargoes very quickly from one country to another without the need for human intervention on the boat. So again, just as we imagine driverless cars, driverless boats are already with us. Drones. So from a drone perspective, this is another area where we have seen the use of a lot of these technologies arriving on farm. Drones, of course, are effectively a form of robot, but nonetheless I've separated them out because of their tremendous use already in farming situations. They allowed farmers to observe or visit the farm remotely, and with the types of cameras and indeed, again, artificial intelligence, we can capture information which is not possible to see with the human eye. Drones are being used from the perspective of soil and field analysis, planting, spraying and monitoring, irrigation, crop health assessment, and you are already seeing a lot of companies. I was remiss to put everybody on here, so apologies if I'm offending anybody by missing them, but there just is so much activity in this field, and all of the major companies, certainly in the seed area, Bayer, Syngenta, DuPont, Pioneer, etc. These are all very much involved in various activities to really help us be much more precise in what we imagine is happening. So the days of a farmer pulling up to a field and looking from the road and making an evaluation as to where a crop might be are over with this type of technology. Sensors, very important as well. This market is already at will be at $2.5 billion by 2025. Nonetheless, tremendous amount of activity assessing air, water, and soil. And obviously, this allows us to analyze results and to make decisions. However, in the case of dairy cows, we've already seen tail monitors, bells, cowbells that are monitors, ear tag monitors, rumen monitors, Fitbits that are attached to the leg of a cow, etc. So we're monitoring movement, estrus cycles, healthy signs of health, and finally also the general herd information. And from my perspective, this whole area of precision farming is something through sensors that clearly is moving us tremendously ahead. But a lot of the sensors companies, again, seem to have some misplaced understandings of what agriculture can or is prepared to pay or should be paying, and that's going to be a limitation to their usage. It's just too expensive to look at some of these probes being put out into fields, etc. Nonetheless, clearly there's a lot of success, and what these companies I see are doing is also beginning to focus on what can you do to help companies interpret the information. So how do you give 365 days a year, 24 hours a day support to farms in Australia, China, New Zealand, Russia, etc. But the companies are out there certainly starting to do that. So it's not just a case of providing something that gives you data that you have to act on, but it's also, I believe, a case of trying to help you make management decisions effectively. We are progressing towards digitization of dairy, and from that perspective, that allows us to really search and to query what we see. Sensors are very important, of course, also in terms of what we get in growing crops. In this case, this is actually a company in China which has been starting to produce vegetables in containers. These are the containers, 20 feet, 40 feet containers that you'd normally send equipment or food around the world, and they're using them in the parking lots of hotels in places like Beijing. They can control the water quality, they can control air quality, therefore they can ensure the food is safer and traceable and transparent. Customers in the hotel, the companies, the restaurants, etc., can actually walk out and see their food being grown. And this has not just been successful in places like China, has already started to go to Dubai, etc. Taking that information and acting on it is part of another company in our accelerator called Agralist, and they are a web-based software platform helping farmers to collect the information, manage crops, look at data, get insights, and then become more profitable. So again, as they describe it, plants are talking, we are here to listen. From my perspective, artificial intelligence is certainly where it's at, and sometimes it feels as though there's a land grab taking place. What we're really trying to do clearly is to mimic what we see in human behavior, and even to move beyond human intelligence in understanding how to make effective decisions about how we grow and how we produce food. It should say simple and inexpensive, but probably simple and expensive is more appropriate at the moment. But it does allow the constant monitoring of fields or herds and eliminating problems. The land grab is being accomplished as part of a lot of different companies, many who don't really understand what's going on in agriculture. So they struggle in many cases to understand why farmers don't accept their technologies. But nonetheless, it really has been quite exciting to see the ways in which Yahoo, IBM, Google, Intel, Nokia, AOL, these are all trying to colonize different parts of the food chain. Machine vision is where we're moving towards. This is where computers can process visual data, providing the farmer with critical information to make decisions, and eventually autonomously even making those decisions without the need for farmer input. It's certainly a brave new world when you start thinking about collecting this through unmanned air vehicles, satellites, or even smartphones. But this, the UAVs or drones, certainly is probably where most of our information is going to come from. I mentioned already digital dairy. What does that lead to? Really what it allows you to do is, for the first time, to look at cows and really know what's happening. Now, maybe because I grew up in Ireland where the farm size was 15 cows when I was growing up, I really thought that farmers still knew exactly what their cows were doing, and clearly that's not the case. If you're on a dairy farm like this one in the United States, this is Maddox's farm in California, they're working with a company called Keenans, which is a Irish-Canadian Silicon Valley venture. And this company is actually teaching its cameras. You see the cameras here located in the roof, very small security cameras, but they've taught the cameras to recognize each individual cow, to be able to watch and learn when the cow is eating and when the cow is not eating. So if the cow is just simply sifting through its feed, it recognizes that. To learn where in the barn the cow goes to eat, maybe to have some ideas as to why it goes to one part of a barn versus another. To look at things like water intake. Obviously, if the cow isn't drinking, that gives us some indicators as to, possible problems, including the early onset of estrus. So we just have lots of opportunities, even collecting the basic information. In this case, you can see here, David is looking at his phone and is able to, in real time, see how many minutes per day, or how many minutes in that particular day that cow has been eating, how many minutes she's been drinking. And from that, then you can go on further to recognize if cows are being bullied, if cows are having trouble, maybe are choosing to eat at one end of a bunk versus another, or one day versus another. Those can help you make management decisions. We noticed, for example, in discussing with them, they were describing how the cows, in particular, on a farm where they have this system in Canada, were not drinking from one particular trough, which obviously related to stray voltage, and on another occasion, how they were not eating well and or milking well based on feed served on a Sunday, which again probably related to the workers not mixing for sufficient time or not providing the feed sufficiently. So in this area in particular, I think Keenans is obviously a leader, and truly AI could reduce the inefficiencies we see, giving us some sense of what the true feed conversions of a dairy cow are. If we look towards augmented reality, it's perhaps a middle ground between reality and virtual reality. It's probably relatively expensive at the moment, but you can imagine in this continuum from the real environment to the virtual environment, there are lots of places, augmented reality and augmented virtual reality, where we can do things which I think could be really interesting from a training and from a management perspective. Computers can see spectrums of light that humans can't, so that could be represented on the screen using goggles. It could help us identify pathogenic bacteria in the food chain. It could help us to use, maybe make for better decisions. For example, I've given this example of planting, or the impact that the fertilizers could have. So from a management perspective, this blending of what you see and what the computer sees could be really, really exciting. Clearly, as we move towards lower cost access to wide spectrum cameras, this will allow us to do some cool things with respect to making decisions in real time. But at the moment, broadband, the visible broadband, is relatively cheap and robust. So I feel, and I know there are others that feel the same way, the multispectral, hyperspectral, and ultraspectral are probably things that are in the future. On farms, to be using cameras that cost into the $3,000–4,000 each, and with all the issues of potential breakdown and or replacement, this is really, I feel, still too early for this technology. and we should be focused on maybe more traditional cameras. We should and will, of course, expect to see the costs go down. Moore's law always says the same thing. But nonetheless, and this is also from the Keenans company, the ability to digitize what you see in a field is tremendously exciting. And I think, from my perspective, this is an example of a field of cauliflower where they've digitized it. It allows them to make real decisions about when the fields are flooded with water. Here they're eliminating some of the other extraneous information, allowing the computer, the machine vision, to focus in from drone imagery specifically on where water is, and now it makes it easy for a farmer to decide where to drill boreholes to rescue his crop and make sure that they don't rot in the field. So here you see the RGB image being removed, showing only the standing water, and therefore instead of having to go randomly into a field, not sure what you're looking for, the farmer is able to make precise management decisions. And again, this Keenans company has been doing this on the dairy side. This is some of the information they've been working with on the crop side. Virtual reality, from my perspective, this is very much, I would see it for training. It's already being used in many industries, veterinary science being an obvious one, but as the cost comes down, I could imagine it being used to train employees without having to go out into the field to look at what they see. And from my perspective, we're thinking of things like being able to create virtual representations on the farm, check animals remotely, and I would think here's an example of what you could do from a reproductive perspective. You can teach people how to inseminate cows and how to recognize other reproductive issues. It does not involve issues with animal welfare because you can reduce the number of invasive examinations. So more efficient, more effective, and from a cost and from a usefulness perspective, really, this is the way we want to go. McDonalds have focused on virtual reality. So they're doing this to allow consumers to visit their farms, gives them 360-degree videos of what those farms look like, and really addresses what we're all very familiar with, the increasing disconnect between people on farms and people in cities. City people don't know what happens in agriculture, and from our perspective, this is really something that virtual reality can allow them to make those visits without actually having set foot on a farm. Blockchain, I'm not sure how many of you on the call are familiar with this. This is potentially one of the most exciting technologies, and it's an electronic ledger which allows you to track each transaction of when food is being moved from through a food chain, through a supply chain. It records or allows us to collect information and ensure full transparency without the person buying that food necessarily knowing everybody that's in the chain. This is particularly important when we're concerned with things like where maybe food companies are buying ingredients from another company, but they don't necessarily want the end user, supermarket consumer, aware of who or what they're purchasing. So it introduces transparency without giving away the secrets, without compromising confidentiality. More importantly, from my perspective, this is very similar to Bitcoin. It allows the process to fit into blocks, and those blocks can be within themselves be quite transparent. So who's interested in this? Walmart in particular is really focused on this, initially in China, but now in the United States, feeling that there's a very large disconnect in agriculture between suppliers and retailers. So you could imagine a food recall, maybe even food poisoning, where this technology can truly result in monumental improvements. Again, lots of people are involved in this area, which I think in itself gives it some credibility. When you see Facebook, Twitter, Uber, Airbnb, all looking at this as being a very dynamic area, it is important for lots of ways in which things are manufactured, but it's particularly interesting from a food and agriculture perspective where confidentiality has always been an issue. So the connection point for me is the Internet of Things. And from this perspective, that connectivity is where devices are able to collect, share, and analyze data directly. As we move forward and look at that Internet of Things, we, for example, have been involved with a company called Keenans, which we purchased, Alltech purchased last year. They have systems on their mixer wagons which allow information in real time to be sent back to the cloud, and then for decisions to be made based on information on milk production and or mixing time, the degree or size of cut, etc., the Mac fiber technology that they speak about. This allows them to be able to send information back to the farmer, back to the producer, telling them how they might adapt or change the ways in which they feed those cows for maximum profitability. So Internet of Things, enabling the platform of a mixer wagon to be connected perhaps from New Zealand through to an operator back in Ireland is quite extraordinary. We've also got somebody in our excuse me, accelerator from Israel. They are actually measuring the amount of water uptake by plants in real time. It's very exciting, the idea that you could actually measure the ways in which plants are drinking water out of the soil and make sure irrigation decisions are being based on that and not being based on human decisions. For example, whether there's a football game on that we want to go home and see, so we irrigate perhaps early, late, or not at all, really making decisions based on human criteria, not based on the plant's requirements. So these types of sensors are really exciting, and there's a lot more of them coming. What about the Internet of Food, the IOF? Could consumers foreseeably be able to detect through something connected to our food exactly where that food is produced, the techniques under which it was grown, maybe give some indications to flavor, potential allergens, the shelf life. So this is the sort of thing that certainly is moving forward at the speed of knots, and again, I think it will be very exciting when we think about how we make food, the food business, even bigger and better. This nice article appeared recently, if you haven't seen it. It contains some of the companies that are part of the Piercelands Accelerator that was started by Alltech, but talks about 80 startups powering the future of farming and agribusiness. So you see a lot of these pieces out there, but again, AgriWeb, which you mentioned earlier, Nico, is in the middle of this article as well. So we started our own accelerator. We don't have any financial interest in doing this. We did it from Alltech's perspective just because we think this is a very exciting area. We want these companies to be part of the symposium we hold in May in Kentucky, which will be attended by 3,500 to 4,000 people. Many people from Australia have come over the last few years, but we want to continue to be seen as supporting thought leadership, and we decided we'd hold or create a late-stage accelerator for startups. And the startups we've worked with, these 10 startups from 8 countries, we actually had 184 applied for our accelerator. Within those, these companies have raised about $3 million each already, so $30 million between the 10 of them. And this has been quite exciting for us, just because these companies are obviously front and center in terms of transforming agriculture. We don't have any, as I mentioned, financial interests, so we're not shareholders. We simply present them as being companies that we feel have the potential to do great things. But indeed, there are many, many other companies out there, and I'm sure anybody on this call knows, has been approached by companies who feel that they have something to contribute to the efficiency of food production. From an Alltech perspective, this is really just the one slide, which is showing what we do. Our business is involved in plants, animal feed, farming itself, the food production system, and even recycling. And from Australia, we obviously have our crop science division, Leonard's, which has been involved in feed and premix, and Alltech itself, which has been involved not just in supplying ingredients, solutions, nutritional solutions for improving animal production and crop production, but also through to what we do on farm. This is not part of the presentation, but I'll mention it just very briefly. I've written a blog on my LinkedIn page on this as well. But I think if you're not familiar with CRISPR, you should be. This is a transformative technology from a genetics perspective, which is really shaking things up, very heavily being used in human applications in China, but being used for pigs, for poultry, for diseases, for productivity, for crops, and has the ability to do everything that GMOs can do at, I believe, 100th of the cost and 10 times as fast. So again, when we talk about transformative technologies, this is not a digital technology. It came out of Berkeley, but it's only existed for 3 years, and already the number of patents and other papers coming out just seems to be growing exponentially. So what is AgTech? When we think about global food security, water scarcity, climate change, I think AgTech is a technology, if I wanted to summarize it, that offers hope. It offers hope of producing food in a very different manner. It could be seen as maybe being the second green revolution, transforming every industry, really every industry that you can think of, and certainly digital technologies are certainly coming in a storm, in a hurry to agriculture. What I think digital technologies allow us to do is to measure more accurately, to monitor more accurately, and obviously to improve tremendously our efficiencies. So healthy, efficient animals, healthy, efficient crops, to my mind, means healthy business and a healthy environment. The retail environment is changing tremendously as well. I did mention on the previous slide the importance of monitoring. Monitoring also now goes through to the carbon footprint, and one of the companies we've worked with in Australia and indeed in the UK is a company called ECO2. It has been doing the carbon footprint for McDonalds, and they are very much involved in helping companies to collect data and to make decisions which improve the productivity of their animals and thereby reduce their carbon footprint. You know, if you want to reduce the carbon footprint of your dairy farm, the best way to do so, the most efficient way to do so, is to increase your milk production per cow. But if that retail environment changes, as we expect and suspect it will, and we've already seen this, stores will be replaced by online shopping. And that online shopping will present different challenges to farmers, maybe different opportunities. Certainly allows dairy farms and milk production and farming in general to connect directly with consumers, but there's going to be a lot more noise, and you're not going to have people trolling up and down with shopping carts making decisions randomly or otherwise on what they're choosing to do. So if you think of the retail shopping experience that you get through supermarkets and grocery stores, that just is not going to exist. Maybe in 10 years' time, certainly is not going to exist by 2050. We hold, as I mentioned earlier, one meeting a year that I would really recommend you to attend. It is May 21st to 24th this year. We will be discussing all of these technologies. All 10 of our companies will be presenting, and indeed we have a number of other speakers speaking about how the digital technologies are disrupting the business of agriculture and food production. But with that in mind, again, just saying, here are the 8 technologies, 9 technologies, let me call them, that I think are transforming what we do. I think I hopefully have captured some essence of what's happening around the world. I don't want to give you the idea that this is everything that's out there. It certainly is hard to capture everything that's going on. It does seem to change on a day-by-day, minute-by-minute basis. But it makes me very enthusiastic that agriculture is in good hands and we have a very exciting future as we see these things coming towards us. We should view them very positively and see the opportunities it has to connect better with consumers, with food which is safer, more affordable, and I believe meets the prosumer requirements, the demands that they have. So Nico, maybe I'll leave it there, and hopefully if you have any questions or other comments.
Thank you very much, Aidan, for such a really inspiring presentation. Certainly, I do agree with you. The future holds a lot of exciting opportunities and challenges that maybe the current and the future generations will face. It is inspiring to see. I was listening to another presentation the other day, and when you were talking about 3D printing, the comment was that kind of challenges the concept of fast food, because it puts fast food against, is it, when you can 3D print food, is that safe, individualized, secure food? Like, you start challenging things that we've thought for our times. The same with robots. Like, a lot of people think robots will replace human labor, and there's a whole series of conversations around having robots to help people work more efficiently and work better and do a better job, that therefore increases productivity and profitability of farming. So really, really very exciting. I've had a couple of questions come through. One is, what do you expect, or what do you see with a global perspective is farmers' view on these technologies? What are farmers thinking when they hear all this? Do they feel they are prepared? Do they feel it's ages away? What are their thoughts behind it?
Well, I think that it's very hard to go onto any big dairy farm in the world today and not find somebody who's taken the decision to try some of these technologies. So those things are happening already. We may look at, I know Moocall is one of our companies, and we may look at their footprint, or you may look at the footprint of a Keenans and say, okay, they're only starting out, they've got relatively small numbers of cows. You've obviously got the SCA company. I think that nonetheless, these technologies are really, really going to start with the early adopters, or have already started with the early adopters, as always, but are moving mainstream in a hurry. The efficiencies that they can bring are too large to be turned down. And effectively, this will become the difference between you staying in business and going out of business. You will not be able to compete, in my view, if you don't embrace these technologies quickly. Maybe you have to be skeptical about some of the claims. You certainly need to be looking at, from the perspective of which ones are going to give you the greatest profit with the least risk. I look at some of the technologies and think they're too expensive, but gradually we're seeing options coming out which are, let's say you have technologies at $300–400 a cow. Now you're starting to talk to people who are bringing technologies in that cost $50 a cow. Clearly, that's going to accelerate also the acceptance rate from a farming perspective. If you can bring me something that costs 50 and gives me 300, rightly or wrongly, that's a lot easier for me to imagine putting on my farm than something that I've spent 300 on and potentially gives me 600. So I think the adoption of technologies will happen quite rapidly. It will make the difference between those that are successful and those that aren't. It has maybe some scary implications about, well, what does it mean for farm workers? What does it mean for, but I think it's inevitable. I don't see any way to push it back. I don't see any way to stand there and imagine this is not going to come like a tsunami. And from that perspective, I think you're better off riding this wave than trying to push it back.
That's a very fair comment, Aidan. And there was one question come through exactly, probably addressing that issue. Is the question says, often people turn to farming in rural areas when they're not considered very academic. How will these new technologies affect this, and what training will farmers need to manage these new technologies?
Well, I think in essence, that's really where I would throw it back to the technology companies. They have to make these technologies as foolproof as possible. Farmers who are using technologies, delivering too much information to them, obviously get loaded down by it and can't make effective management decisions. I heard of an example of where a tractor now can carry out 30 or 40 digital information collection, streams, and yet most farmers are just using one, which is the measurement as to whether the tractor is running or not running. So in effect, they're controlling their workers' working behavior by whether the tractor is on or off, or maybe whether the tractor is moving or not moving, but not looking at all of the other wonderful things it can do, because it gives them more information than they can manage. So I throw it back to the technology companies who are bringing these technologies to us. They have to make it very readily obvious and accessible, such that we are very clear what do we do with this information, how do we act on it, how do I manage my cows? How do I manage my crops? How do I manage my flock of birds? What do I do with this information? There is no point in giving me information which either frustrates me or loads me down such that I actually can't change anything I'm doing, but I know the inefficiency that I have in my system. That's not going to be any use to us.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think that I've discussed for some time now that probably it opens new business models and industries of people that can service and manage that information and help the farmers. Probably then it comes down to who pays for this technology and who gets the benefits. But I think there will be new opportunities. There was another question, and probably it's related to the startups that you've selected for the accelerator program. Is a lot of the commercial applications of feed or water monitoring devices, do you think they support previous management or behaviors that we've thought for different industries, or they will challenge what we thought was best practice for those industries?
The amount of things I've seen from the use of the cameras in California, as you gathered maybe from my presentation, has set me aback, because we're learning things that maybe we didn't know. We are looking as a company at seeing when cows are eating from one part of a barn versus another, whether that indicates that the feed hasn't been well mixed. And we're looking at digestibility studies on fiber and total mixed ration to see whether that's the case. We're trying to understand, should we be managing how we group cows better, not based on age or based on size or based on milk production, but maybe based on temperament. What can we expect from the point of view of automatically feeding with robots? Obviously, this is increasingly being used as a way to manage large herds of cows, but how do the cows feel about the robots? Do they react to them positively or negatively? So watching behavior, I think, I'm just giving the cow example, but you can take the same example with crops. You can take the same example of where irrigation is so critical. One of the companies we've looked at in our accelerator is magnetizing pesticides, is magnetizing fertilizers, and can eventually magnetize water. And by spraying that onto crops with a charge, it avoids wind drift, obviously being the products being blown away by the wind. Well, clearly that reduces, again, the amount of pesticide or fertilizer that ends up in the ditch being washed down the drain. So a lot of these things, these technologies are extremely exciting. They really can improve our efficiencies a lot. And I still, as I mentioned before, they're going to provide us with information either we weren't looking for, we didn't understand, insights that we probably never imagined before.
That's a good point. Well, what role do you think, Aidan, does the government have in assisting the industry to make the best use of these disruptive technologies?
I'm a big believer in the free market, and that if a technology is good, that farmers will see it. They'll either use it themselves or see their neighbours making a pile more money, and will make the decision themselves without the need for government intervention to use them. If I'm in a country where the cost of production is high, I don't really see Australia as having high cost of production. I think globally, if anything, it's got quite low cost of production, sometimes even the lowest in the world in milk production. But nonetheless, if it has a high or less efficient, I think this could be the difference between being able to compete and export or not able to. I take the example of chickens, for example, where I think that these types of technologies could be the game changer, allowing you to compete with Brazil and the United States in markets, open markets like China. So I would feel that the government has to strategically make decisions about technology and see whether it is important to accelerate the acceptance or implementation technology from a country or regional competitiveness perspective. But frankly, if the technology is good enough, the farmers should accept it anyway. So maybe some hybrid of the two, where maybe you provide some funding to allow people to accept it quickly, and then the ongoing costs are absorbed by the company. Something like that could be useful, but I genuinely believe, again, that we will see very quickly the farmers who embrace technologies quickly will survive, and those who don't won't.
That's a good point. A lot of these digital technologies, by the nature themselves, rely on good connectivity. Do you think the access to internet could be a limitation in some rural areas to implementing some of these technologies in different countries? And we see part of that in Australia, but obviously some other countries face even more serious problems than what we do. And that will probably be solved in the future, but it may slow down adoption of technologies that maybe are ready, but cannot be more adopted because of that limitation.
You're absolutely right. It's almost creating a new third world where if you don't have access to, fast internet speeds, and in the future those will become faster and faster, the collection of all this information, the interpretation of it through a cloud-based system is of course completely contingent upon access to speedy ways of getting that data back to the server, back to the system. So from my perspective, again, you go back to what governments could help with. That's certainly one that is absolutely necessary.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any more questions coming through. Definitely, I would have thousands of questions to ask you, but I don't want to tie you up. I know it's late in the evening. Aidan, once again, I want to really thank you for your time and for such an inspiring presentation. This webinar, as with all our webinars, will be recorded and will become available on the New South Wales DPI Dairy website. We have also a New South Wales DPI Dairy Facebook page, which is followed by more than 750 people from all around the world, and a newsletter which is sent out regularly 3 times a year to more than 400 subscribers. So any of the participants interested in this, please feel free to join these initiatives and to stay updated on all the work that we do in the areas of precision dairy farming. And for more information, I do want to encourage you to visit the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries website, where you will be able to access tools and resources about the dairy industry. Within there, there's a specific section on robotic milking systems, which includes a lot of this information on technologies. So once again, thank you very much for joining today, and I hope to see you all next time. Thank you very much.